All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed lunch. There's been a couple of networking opportunities so far. I've met a few of you, but I really wish I could meet a few more. And so, actually, on the count of 3, if you could just tell me your name, that'd be great. It's going to be a very efficient networking session here. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Very nice to meet you. Don't have that many business cards, though. All right, so now we're going to revisit that Shark Tank-like format that we had from yesterday. So yesterday we heard from one of the 2 teams who won a Building Capacity for Science Communication Partnership Award. Let's welcome the other winning team and the discussants to the stage, and here they are. This group's project is called Evaluating New Approaches to Promoting Vaccination. Brendan Nyhan is a professor of government at Dartmouth College. Christine Finley, who has experience in public health and education, is with the Vermont Department of Health. After we learn about Brendan and Christine's research project, our discussants will each take 3 minutes to share their thoughts about the collaboration and the project. Our discussants are Doran Weber, Vice President of Programs and the Program Director at the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. So get this, Doran's had many different professional experiences in the past. He's been a teacher, a tutor, a taxi driver, a romance novelist, a busboy, and a boxer. Where do you find the time? Okay, Suzanne Folks is the Vice President of Communications at Research America. Suzanne not only cares deeply about science, but has a passion for the performing and visual arts. Paul Hanley is the President and CEO of Climate Central. And Greg Bausted, is a program director for Science Sandbox, a Simons Foundation initiative. Greg is, so get this, Greg is still convinced that he's going to take a year off from his PhD to explore science writing. And so Greg is 15 years and counting on that one. All right, and now I'm going to take my seat and turn it over to you.
How do we move the slides? Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. We're excited to share our work and to learn from all of you. I want to provide some background on why vaccine communication is important at this time, and then Brendan's going to describe the study and our collaboration. The first thing I want to say is vaccines work, and it really is a fact. This is a graph that was in a recent National Geographic article. And if you look along the left axis, it takes you from 1930 to 2015. And each dark ball represents the introduction of a vaccine, and each red ball represents disease cases. And the larger the red ball, it's kind of an exponential increase. As each vaccine has been released, the incidence of disease has dramatically decreased, with the greatest impact among children. But if vaccines work so well, why is vaccine communication so important after the dramatic reduction that we've seen in the years that they've been out? Research has shown that one's perception of risk is influenced in ways that we may not always consider. Perceived benefit does matter. Most parents have never seen a child with measles or Hib meningitis or had to face a child with paralysis from polio. Some of us who are older may remember that, but there's many that haven't seen it. But they do know parents or they do know families that have had to face autism. And they have heard that autism may be related to vaccines, and that stays with them. Imposed risk also feels scarier, and vaccines are mandated for enrollment in childcare and kindergarten in all 50 states. Trust not only allays fear, but it also allays perceived risk. And if you look at who makes vaccines, it's pharmaceutical companies, and then the government recommends them. Many of today's parents may not hold those up as institutions that they trust the most. And man-made risks do cause more worry. Natural is often perceived as better. And even though you need a functioning immune system to have a natural response to the vaccines are man-made. So when we look at perceived risk, vaccines often come out on the wrong end of that. Looking at these factors, it isn't surprising that 1 in 3 parents today have some concern about vaccinating their children. These concerns may lead a parent to seek ways to avoid vaccinating. And what options do parents have? This is a map of exemptions permitted for school and child care. And there's 47 states allow either a religious and or a philosophic exemption. Only 3 states do not allow that. And with those exemptions, that's where parents can opt their children out. The 3 states that don't are in white, and they're West Virginia, Mississippi, and California. And California passed a law in 2015 to eliminate the philosophic and religious exemption. And you may remember that's when there was a measles outbreak associated with the theme park there. Here's an example on a statewide basis, and this is looking at Vermont's provisional, the exemptions and provisional admittance. And Vermont was one of the last states to have requirements for school. They came in 1979, and we always had exemptions. And they tooled along at a very low rate. And then in 2008, when we added required vaccines, they increased, and they stayed high despite numerous initiatives to reduce them. And that philosophic exemption never dropped until it was eliminated. The blue line that you see is provisional admittance. So those are children that are not fully vaccinated but do not have an exemption. And the thin line on the bottom is our religious exemption, which has increased but not to the degree of where we were with philosophic exemptions. Fear and concern related to vaccines is increasing in the US. Groups such as this one are working to raise concern regarding vaccines and impact policy. Misinformation is communicated in a variety of venues with very savvy use of social media. Parents' need for education and guidance in order to vaccinate with confidence is higher than ever. But as we've heard, we don't know exactly what that should look like and what works best. So we've learned a few things along the way. We've learned that it's important to understand your audience and not face them in a judgmental way. It's important to focus on the fence sitters. The people that are completely opposed to vaccines will never be interested, and they're usually less than 1%. Leverage the credibility of healthcare providers. They're our partners in this, and they're very well trusted among patients. And the last one is the personal stories and testimonials can be very powerful. And this is, on the right, an example of a recent PBS article that highlighted a young girl with leukemia in Vermont that's in an area where there's high exemption rates among some of the states and what her mother faced. Numerous communication strategies such as this one are being employed across the US. However, they're not often evaluated, and sometimes they're underfunded. We need research going ahead to really figure out what works with communication, vaccine communication.
All right, well, that's where I come in. This is a partnership that we've formed to try to answer this question of what messages and strategies are most effective in countering vaccine hesitancy and protecting public health. That turns out to be a question that hasn't been rigorously evaluated to nearly the extent that you might assume. At least those kinds of studies were much less common than I anticipated when I first entered this research area. And what I've learned is we should distrust our intuitions about what works and instead test those rigorously. So in 2 studies with co-authors, we've evaluated the effectiveness of trying to counter vaccine hesitancy by giving corrective information to people about vaccines. Correcting the misperception first that the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine causes autism, and second, that the flu vaccine can give you the flu. Those are both very widespread misperceptions which may contribute to vaccine hesitancy. And so the intuition that people have is that we should provide scientific evidence disproving those myths. What we found, though, in randomized controlled trials with nationally representative samples was that exposure to that corrective information actually caused people to express less intention to vaccinate rather than more. And those responses, those negative responses, were concentrated among the people who had the least favorable attitudes towards vaccines, precisely the group of greatest concern when it comes to maintaining herd immunity and protecting public health. So what we've done in this partnership is brought together scholars and practitioners to try to evaluate this question more rigorously in this context of a specific state, where we have a context that is well known. There's not one vaccine hesitancy problem in this country. There are many. It's a quite heterogeneous phenomenon, and so we're going to focus on one in particular in the study. It's going to be a randomized controlled trial. One thing I have to say, though, we're not able to give you all the details of this study because we're still designing it together, and we haven't run it yet. So this is being webcast all across the country, and we're going to share our results with you in the future. But what I'd like to do in the time I have left is talk to you a little bit about how this partnership has worked and what I think it can teach us about how these collaborations can be successful. So for academics like myself, we often lack the kind of expertise and long experience that our amazing collaborators at the Vermont Department of Health have. They know this field. They are on the front lines of the vaccine hesitancy fight every day. And there's a great deal of substantive knowledge that they bring to the table. People who work as practitioners often are engaging with behavior, not just the kind of survey responses that academics are forced to use. In this case, we can look, for instance, at actual behavioral measures of vaccination rates. That's something that's not accessible to us as academics working on our own. And finally, we can think about how to work in a specific context where our practitioner partners might have greater insights into the particular local context where there's a communication challenge. On the practitioner side, of course, many practitioners aren't trained in experimental and survey research methods, so that's something that academics can bring to that partnership. And of course, hopefully, they may lack the funding support that academics might be able to help them provide. So what can we do together? For academics, we really benefit from this kind of collaboration because of the design feedback that content experts provide. My postdoc, DJ Flynn, and I have worked closely with Chris and her team at the Vermont Department of Health to design interventions that we think are going to be most effective at promoting vaccination. We're also working with them to evaluate the effectiveness of those messages on behavioral measures, which is not something that's possible without that kind of partnership. What's most exciting about this partnership, though, is the ability to have real-world impact, right? To scale the kinds of insights that we find in this research to the state as a whole and try to counter the vaccine hesitancy, which is an ongoing challenge there. And of course, this partnership has raised lots of interesting questions for us as scholars that we hope to pursue in future research. So this is an incredibly valuable opportunity for scholars, and I hope it's a valuable one for practitioners too. I think the academic mindset can help create the kinds of rigorous evaluation that we need more of. Okay? And we're going to provide, I think, the most rigorous evidence to date of the effectiveness of vaccine messaging, which is a critically important social issue. We need rigorous evidence on that question. I think these partnerships can also help clarify where there are limitations in the kinds of measurement that practitioners and program officers are doing. It's often not as clear as it might seem at first what success means. And thinking about how to design an experiment to test the success of the approaches you're using is a very clarifying exercise, and hopefully one that builds expertise within the organization to help them conduct further evaluation going forward. Now, this is not a process that is without challenge, as I think everyone in this room knows. The first challenge is, of course, finding funding support to make these kinds of collaborations possible. We're very grateful to the Rita Allen Foundation and the Sackler Colloquium for funding this project. I think there's a lot more that could be done to support these kinds of collaborations. I think it's also important to think about how to facilitate them in terms of a matchmaking process. You can think of this as a kind of dating market where there are scholars out there who love to collaborate and there's practitioners out there who love to collaborate, but helping them find each other, connecting people who have common interests and expertise is actually harder than it might seem. I've been working in this vaccine area for years, and this is the first partnership like this I've been able to form, and it was only because of this Sackler opportunity. So what I want to conclude with is just to say that I think this partnership has taught me even more about how research and practice can inform each other and what a valuable model this can be. In particular, I want to urge those of you on the practitioner side to think about experiments you could do. They're often quite cheap and can be integrated into your existing programs and activities. We can learn so much scientifically and fulfill the mission that we all share in this room. So thanks very much.